grandmother and grandfather. They met each other here, but they both moved here in their early to mid-20s. My grandfather lived in East Baltimore. My grandmother lived in West. My mother's parents.
Okay.
So my father, he and my mom broke up when I was 2, and he left. I met my dad, so I didn't have a strong relationship with my grandparents. I never met my grandfather on my father's side. I met my grandmother. She died a few years ago. See, my grandfather moved here. He started a cab company. He and my grandmother got together. We always thought they were married, but I just found out recently they were never married. So of course it was like taboo back then if you were together, and they separated in my mother's like early teen years. The grandmother worked for the city. She worked for a housing authority, and I remember her going to work every day. She loved to walk, so she would walk to work. We lived in West Baltimore, closer to downtown, and her job was in the city. My grandmother was born in 1935. My grandfather, I don't know. My mother was born in 1962. She grew up in East Baltimore, and then after my grandparents split in West Baltimore. Now it's called Lexington Terrace, and it's not far from downtown Baltimore. So my mother went to what I've always been told, she went to one of the first desegregated schools, like junior high. But she tells me stories of her going to school, and it's like if she missed the bus home, or if anyone missed the bus home, they could have lost their life. Kids were running to the buses after school. Some of the kids would get on, the black kids, students would get on the white students' bus, and they would just like get beat up really bad. She remembers a white student, a girl, got on the bus with the black students, and they set her hair on fire. So it was really hostile. So my mother, when my grandfather and my grandmother split, it became really hard on the household. And my grandmother put more pressure on, I have 2 aunts, put more pressure on my mother and my aunts to work. So she dropped out of high school, went and got a job. She got an apartment. She had me when she was 22 years old. And she eventually went back and got her GED, and eventually getting her associates and bachelor's and master's. She was a nurse, but her master's is in health informatics. So she does like the patient protection systems, other programs for the VA hospital. And she teaches nursing clinicals. On my mom's side, I have 2 aunts. My mom married after my dad, so my stepdad. I can't even count how many there are. She said she met my father. I think she was out. My dad was in the military. My father is 15 years older than my mother. So she had to mature early, or grow up in a sense at a young age, and they could relate in ways. Met when she was 19, had me when she was 22, and they broke up 2 years after I was born. And shortly after that, my mom met my stepdad, and they got together, got married, children. I remember when I was like 7 or 8, we lived in East Baltimore. I went to it's a Catholic school over there, St. James and St. John's Catholic school. It wasn't the greatest neighborhood. I guess when you have love and that community, you don't really notice that at a young age. We eventually moved from there and moved to West Baltimore, where my grandmother, not far in the same neighborhood as my grandmother. And we lived in several neighborhoods over the years: West Baltimore, South Baltimore, Northeast. I just remember moving around with my mom and my stepdad often. It was always, for some reason, in neighborhoods that weren't too far from each other. because my stepdad had a really big family, and they wanted to stay in the same area as the other family members. So it was always a cousin or an aunt or uncle you would walk outside the door and see or be able to play with. I really enjoyed high school. I did. I went to Edmondson Westside High School. It was off of Edmondson Avenue. And when I went then, the school that I was zoned to, my mom didn't want me to go to. But you had to have like a certain average to get in. I got accepted. I was excited. Tons and tons of friends that I still have today. I participated in a lot of things. Class treasurer, debate team, yearbook committee, fashion show committee. Like my grandmother, just hearing conversations about not being paid what she deserved, being a woman and then being a black woman in a workforce. I don't remember growing up ever seeing a white person walk through my neighborhood. Other than someone that was maybe coming through to maybe like corporate office, going to the leasing office or something like that. I had a summer job with the leasing office one year, and I remember vividly seeing white people in the office and thinking to myself, I don't ever see them walking through the neighborhoods. Johns Hopkins was a hospital we went to for our health care. The area now is much different because I know now it's a little more diverse, or the people there a little more mixed. It was all black people. Like I remember Baltimore has changed a lot. I remember clearly, like houses that I see that are vacant now, I remember seeing them filled with families and people in and out of them. They're neighborhoods that I can drive through that I grew up in, and it looks like a ghost town. It's so heart-wrenching to see what once was like this busy street and people outside playing, or neighbors sitting on the steps, and it's just empty. It looks like ground zero, almost. The neighborhoods that we grew up in, my grandmother stayed there for a while. She didn't want to leave. We had to force her out. But when we moved her, there was just so many vacant places. And I mean, it just makes you think, like, where did all the people go? I mean, given that a lot of the neighborhoods, it can be violence and things like that. But I also know that people move from the city out. It's just like they were all spread out, almost like different counties. I always think to myself, like, is there some agenda that, is coming down the pipe, and we don't have all the details yet? Like the change for Baltimore that's being. Like I remember there being high rises that they tore down, and in my opinion, I felt like Lexington Terrace, right by Martin Luther King Boulevard, that area, it was an attempt to gentrify, but people moved in and then moved out. Like those were houses for homeowners and people that had subsidized housing. It's like they tried to mingle or mix their neighborhood, and it wasn't successful, in my opinion. I know areas where things were torn down, they put properties there for homeowners, and it was the same thing. Like I keep saying they, but like people moved in and then moved out. So I don't know if not enough change was made in the neighborhoods to keep, because you'll go in a neighborhood that I know was empowered. It was low income, and it's like in the center of it is a closed off section of homes that they made for homeowners, and all around it is still playgrounds that no child should play on. And I guess similar to like Port Covington, the houses, it's like the speech that's given is it'll bring jobs here, but around that area you have homes that those people that work there can't afford, so you're not really putting the money where you think. My grandmother was actually one of them. My grandmother on my father's side, because she couldn't walk and she wanted to see everything and still be involved, the living room had a bed in it, and she sat there and she could watch. She knew everybody in the neighborhood. Everybody knew and respected her. People would come past all the time, stop and bring food. Or I remember like my aunts and uncles, they would cook. I remember just like seeing like big pots of food all the time. They would cook and feed the family, and if anybody walked past, they would offer food, or you could come in and stop in and get a plate. Sundays was always a day. It was like a big meal that was going to be cooked. They would get crabs, enough for like we would eat, and anybody walking past, they wanted to come and sit down, they could. This big area out back, and that's where we all would be, playing, riding our bikes, on skates. Older people that sold like penny candy and frozen cups, and they knew every kid in the neighborhood by their name, and if you did something wrong, people would tell on you. Growing up was good, and like I said, I think back, we didn't realize things that were short and what we didn't have, and moments that we didn't, because the community and the love was always there. I mean, there are people now that are old enough to be my grandparents, and I can still go through that neighborhood and they will remember me and will say hi. It's definitely different now. It's sad, but it's like that generation was really big on community, and when they left or passed, I remember when my grandmother passed away, the family just kind of dispersed and broke up. Like every Saturday morning when I would stay there, or even growing up in my house, we had to get up and clean the house from top to bottom at 6 a.m. I mean, it would be like washing walls and dusting off antiques and everything. The children cleaned up. And when like that generation passed, or my grandmother passed, everything just kind of dwindled, and those traditions and things were not upheld or kept. There are more neighborhoods I'm aware of now than what I knew about when I was a child. My favorite neighborhood growing up had to be Lexington Terrace. And what's crazy is that it definitely wasn't income that was, majority of it was low income. I say it was income. It was a neighborhood that majority of it was low income. It gets a really bad rap. There's a lot of violence now, and there were things that happened when I was growing up. But again, I think with the community that was there, and it was just lively. It was always something going on. It was always music playing, people running around, kids buying candy from the candy lady and eating popsicles, and people having dance battles. And it for me, I felt like it was a spirit of Baltimore. Like the black community. It was true to that. So it's so crazy I even feel that way, because as an adult, and I know the neighborhood, like I know what it is, I don't think I would ever raise my child there. But it was fun. I had my daughter 2 months before I turned 21. When I had my daughter, a few months after she was born, I moved out. Her dad and I moved together. We lived in Baltimore City until she was 4. I sent my daughter to preschool at one of the schools, and I just wasn't happy with the education that she was receiving. Yeah, left Baltimore when she was 4. It was 2009. Yeah. Every city in this country has a bad part, or there's crime, there's violence. I think Baltimore, especially with TV shows like The Wire and The Corner and things like that, they take maybe the worst parts, the worst things about the city, and publicize that. Baltimore is, the older I get, the more I appreciate it. Like the art here and the culture, it's eclectic. If I had to sum it up in one word, no one way to really describe Baltimore. It's a lot of history here. It's a lot of culture. The food is amazing. Like, you get a little bit of the southern hospitality here mixed with a little bit of New York. Yeah. I think about if I would buy a home here after my kids grow up.